Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we're going to talk about the new Intune Suite. If you listened to our episode last week, I kind of went on my soapbox and talked about endpoint management and how important that is to integrate with your identity provider. And Intune is one of the things that Adam and I work with daily, and it has some new things that are coming out for it. Now, we did cover some of this in our Beyond E5 episode, which was episode 102, but now the new Intune Suite is generally available. So we're going to deep dive into each one of the components that are either generally available, some of it's still in public preview for the components of it, and then there's actually more that's still coming out later this year. And it's rolling pretty fast. So before you know it, most of the stuff will already be out. So the components of the Intune Suite are Intune Remote Help, Endpoint Privilege Management, Advanced Endpoint Analytics, the Microsoft Tunnel for MAM, which is Mobile Application Management, and then coming is Advanced App Management and Cloud Certification Management. I can't remember exactly what the pricing is, but it is an add-on. It's not part of the E3 or E5 bundles, so it's something that you have to add on as part of your Microsoft agreement. So if you do find value in some of these things or all of these things, which we're going to talk about, then contact your Microsoft rep about it. The first thing that we'll talk about is Remote Help, and this one has been out for the longest. This was the first thing to launch. It is a remote help tool that allows administrators to connect to user devices, similar to a LogMeIn or a BombGuard. But the main difference is that you can authenticate through your Azure AD account, and you have those devices populated within Intune in the same portal. You can scope conditional access around it. You might be familiar with Quick Assist, which is like the thing that's built into Windows 10 and Windows 11. And this is kind of like that, except you don't have to be an administrator on the device as a user to do things, and it's less user interaction where I provide you a code, you enter in a code, that sort of thing. So Quick Assist is built in. It's nice. It's not really an enterprise tool because it doesn't really integrate with Azure AD for an identity to sign in. Another cool thing about Remote Help is that you can scope conditional access to see if the admin even wants to connect to a machine. So let's say I'm the admin and Adam is asking for help. He has some issues. I can actually see whether his device is in compliance and why it might be out of compliance. So let's say his device is compromised and he's having issues. Well, do I, as an admin, want to connect to a compromised machine? Probably not. So that's actually pretty cool in the fact that I can make a decision as an admin whether or not I want to connect to an out-of-compliance device. And, of course, you have all the other things like MFA, logging, so you can see what's all been done. So very fleshed out remote help tool, I believe. And integration with ServiceNow, Android, macOS is coming out later this year.
I think conceptually, everyone listening to the show or watching the show understands what this is and what it does. This has been sold for a while. So this component has been generally available for some time now, I think almost a year. And it has been something that's been sold and supported by Microsoft. So this is definitely the component that's been in market the longest. And like Andy talked about, there are benefits to having your remote assistance tool baked into your endpoint management platform because you have that additional context, because it can respect RBAC roles, because of all those additional data points to help you make the best decisions when you're going to log into that device. And so if you have a different solution today, this may allow you to consolidate and simplify if it's something you want to look at.
The next one is Endpoint Privilege Management, and that is currently in preview as of March 2023. It will be generally available shortly in April of this year, but that enables controlled elevation of Windows standard users to a specific executable or process or application. So one of the biggest problems is you have power users who need to have elevated privilege for something, but most of the time they don't need local admin. And in the past, there's really just been either you aren't a local admin or you are a local admin. And the problem is if you give local admin, it gives privilege to a lot of different things, like the ability to install software, the ability to disable security settings, modify group policy, change your network settings, or modify even like folder settings to make certain folders read-write when they should be read-only. And you have the ability to create new local admins. So local admin is one of the biggest problems in security. And so most people try not to allow it if you're in a very secure environment. But when you do that, then you have a lot of support tickets. Hey, I need this installed. Hey, I need this folder to be able to read and write. So what this Endpoint Privilege Management does is it allows you to elevate for a certain application, right? You only need elevation for whatever application it is, like some editing software or whatever, and you can add that to an allow list, and what the user will see is a prompt pop up. Hey, you want elevated access? Go ahead and have it for this application. And you're very discreet and surgical about what you're giving privileged access to. So you can keep the scope and time to a minimum and scope out those policies, which I think is really beneficial for a lot of organizations.
I wonder if organizations that have previously had most of their users as local admin, if this might be the push to allow them to move to not having privileged access all of the time. And maybe I'm foreshadowing a bit there, Andy, because you might know who I'm talking about, our own employer. Maybe that's why there's this conversation around removing admin rights locally, is because this might make it possible to do that without it being completely painful. It's an interesting thought. One thing I like about this, and it's just the advantage of being the operating system vendor, is I'm uncomfortable when you have third-party solutions do this, because you still obviously have to have something that is privileged in order to escalate to that privilege. And if that's that third-party code running, now you have privileged third-party code running that could be an attractive attack target. And I'm simplifying, and I understand that, there's more to OS architecture than that, but still, I like it better when it's just baked in at an OS level to do something like this. As a security practitioner, I think that should be your choice whenever possible, is to use native controls and native tools, just because they're going to have less attack surface associated with them. And to be honest, because the OS vendor knows where all the bodies are buried and they know all the kind of the rough edges to avoid. So this is cool. I know other vendors do this too. Again, I think there's a reason, even if you are using a different solution and you like it, to look at this from a security practitioner perspective, just because I think it's pretty safe to assume this is going to actually reduce your attack surface compared to a third-party solution. And then again, just having it integrated into the platform, integrated into the endpoint management solution, there is value in that, again, for all the reasons Andy laid out talking about remote help.
The third one is the Advanced Endpoint Analytics. And this to me is basically a lift from the old Windows Analytics. If you were familiar with that back in the day, that was out to help organizations migrate from Windows 7 to Windows 10 and look at different data points of crashes or application incompatibility. So this is that version, but for Intune now. So for devices that are enrolled in Intune and you're able to collect those endpoint analytics, it can see different anomalies. So I can tell if this application is hanging, or this process is hanging, or this process is causing the OS to crash, or even when I start up a machine and the boot time to usability is longer than usual. It can look at those things and then allows administrators to kind of get ahead of the problems that might arise. Instead of waiting for that support ticket to come, I can reach out to that user. Hey, Adam, I see that your machine has been acting very slow. This application seems to hang all the time. And maybe you don't have time because your day-to-day job is taking up your time and you don't have time to file a support ticket. This is a way to kind of proactively reach out and attack those problems that may come up. So I think it's very beneficial if your help desk is actually looking for more work, or you have people assigned to this particular thing to take a look at the analytics and look at problems, or have alerts that pop up that will let you know.
So this is definitely less of a security focused tool. To be fair, this is endpoint management, which is usually adjacent to security, but more managed by your internal personal productivity, user experience, employee experience teams. This is something I think organizations don't spend enough time on, and they should spend more time on, because I've made the point a lot that with remote work or even hybrid work, your company's people, their primary conduit through which they access and engage with your organization is through their company issued device. And if that experience is subpar, then it makes it feel like the whole company is subpar, because that's the lens through which they view everything. And I think for a long time, IT has kind of gotten away with delivering a lousy experience and just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, well, what are you going to do? We need to have 9 different agents because we have 9 different stakeholders told us we needed it. And we need to do this, and this control. And so, yes, it's lousy, but hey, at least we met our audit requirements. This is a way to have that visibility and deliver that improved user experience, which has countless benefits and could even argue, as we've talked about on past shows, have a security benefit, because we talked about the risk of insider risk. And I forget the name of the attack group now. It was the one that was using a lot of novel techniques and got into a lot of companies. They got into Okta. I think they got into Microsoft a little bit too. And if you remember the name, but what they were doing is they were paying people for their creds and just basically saying, hey, do you have creds at this company? We'll pay you. And to be able to log in and use your stuff, keeping them happy, giving them a good work experience, that could be actually a security benefit too. So don't sleep on this either.
The other thing that is out as well is Tunnel for MAM. And this, I think, is a brilliant solution.
Yes.
Because oftentimes you may be a little heavy-handed when it comes to security. Adam and I have done a lot of episodes on talking about device management and some of the fallacies, but also some of the benefits of not being as heavy-handed. Different scenarios. Maybe you just have a frontline worker who needs access to one app and you want to allow that on a personal device. You don't have to enroll that device and push out device configurations and certificates and all this other stuff, because they're going to see, oh, company X has the ability to wipe the device, right? Like when you enroll into management, it is a fairly big deal for some users, seeing Big Brother or whatever on their device, right? Even though all device management solutions do not have the ability really to like read your texts or, see your photos and all of that. But MAM is a very, very lightweight solution where you're just managing the compliance of that application. And so as long as you have certain things that are getting checked, you're not getting pushed out any device configurations, meaning like I can't check whether, or I can't force you to change your passcode on your device. I could maybe check to make sure you have a 6-digit passcode. And if you don't, then I go ahead and not allow you to have access. But I can't force you to do device configuration changes. I can't push out certificates to you. So MAM is just wrapped around that sandbox of the application, which, if you don't know, Android and iOS do that natively. So it's, some vendors talk about, we sandbox all the data within this. Mobile applications are very secure these days. And so we wrap that security around the application, and no other device changes are required. This allows you to have a tunnel or a VPN connection, a micro VPN connection from just that application to your corporate network within Azure or the tunnel, wherever you have the VPN terminate. So Microsoft Tunnel is something that we have for Intune, and now you can connect your iOS, padOS, Android devices just from the single app, which also could be done through app proxy, but app proxy is just usually browser based. This can do it for the app itself to your VPN termination.
I think it was over a decade ago now. I worked for a company briefly that used Good Mobile at the time. This is 2012 timeframe. And I had no experience with it at the time. I understood the concept of MDM, but Good didn't require MDM. You just installed the app from the App Store. You went through this kind of convoluted sign-in process. But once you were signed in, it had everything was self-contained. It had an email client that was lousy. It had a lousy web browser. And I think it had like lousy calendar contacts too. But it was all there. It didn't use any of the native apps. And the thing that surprised me is this company was like, at the time, very, very strict security. I think they still are, but obviously don't have current experience. And yet, from this app alone, you could get to the internal intranet that required VPN access. So, and I know Good had a different architecture. It was actually similar to Bez, if you remember how that worked. But this app talked back to a Good server inside the corporate network and then gave you access to intranet. And this was a decade ago. And so it's not like, oh, Microsoft finally caught up a decade later. I mean, there's been different technologies to do that. Like you talked about, app proxy has been around for a long time and has been a great solution to deliver a similar experience. You could deliver the Edge browser wrapped in MAM, and you could point it to an app proxy app and get to the internal intranet. And you've been able to do that for many years. And you could use this to do that too, although I think app proxy is still a better solution for that. But where this comes in real handy is, let's say you have a line of business application that has a line of business backend that sits inside your corporate network. And then there's a constituent mobile app to it as well. And so when you're inside CorpNet, it works fine. Well, if you want to make that work outside CorpNet, and maybe you don't want people to have to enroll their whole device to do it, you just want to be able to install that one app, here's a way you can do it now. Or you can obviously do this with the Microsoft apps as well, if you have use cases where that might be required too. So it's just something to come in handy, a simpler way. Again, you talked about all the benefits of MAM, so we don't need to rehash those, but now making that even more powerful for some specific use cases where I want to deliver a MAM-enabled application, but still allow that user to punch a hole and get inside that CorpNet to do that one task or that one thing. So just another tool in your toolbox to deliver similar behavior and results.
And then finally, there are a few things that are still coming out later this year. The advanced app management is coming out, and that is something to manage your enterprise application catalog. It allows you to have app discovery, deployment, and automatic updating for out-of-date applications. I think this is something that a lot of customers have been asking about. Right now, when you deploy applications through Intune, you have to deploy another package on top of that in order to replace an out-of-date package. Very similar to how SCCM works, but previously there wasn't a way to check whether or not you had a previous version installed, so it would just push it out regardless. Now there's versioning, so you can have precedent, which is very similar to SCCM. So if I have an older application, I can check that application and push out the new one and have that take precedent over the old one. I think this is taking that a step further, where you can have automatic updating. It'll be a little bit more seamless. It'll have app discovery built in. And then finally, the cloud certificate management solution. Again, we talked about this a little bit on the Beyond E5, and mostly speculating here, but it is kind of a certificate as a service. We're gonna have some way to issue and manage VPN and Wi-Fi certs from Intune without having an on-premise infrastructure, which I think is going to be interesting. I don't know the details of that. That one's coming out probably later in H2 of this year. But I think as this Intune Suite becomes more and more mature, we are going to add additional capabilities over time that's going to provide some endpoint security, some automation, and allow, a better user experience and admin experience to manage these devices. Any final thoughts, Adam?
I think that's a good summary, and it's like a lot of things coming out of Microsoft these days. Just you said this at the top of the show, but I'll just add the clarity again. This is not included in E5. This is a separate add-on. You do need to own the Intune base product, of course, to be able to add on to it. And actually, there's two flavors of add-ons. There's an Intune P2 and an Intune Suite. And your Microsoft account team can get you clarity on what's included in each and the pricing and options available for those.
Awesome. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.